My name is Ben Tapp. I was born in Katherine and lived at Killarney when I was a kid growing up. Killarney is a cattle station up near Katherine, over in the Victoria River District. Yeah, I grew up there. There was 10 in our family. I'm in the middle. When the old fellow bought Killarney, there was nothing on there at all. He was a Sydney boy, actually, born and lived in Vaucluse in Sydney, went to Scots College. He was extremely intelligent. And anyway, he read a book in his school days, The Kings in Grass Castle, and he got inspired by that, and he went to the territory. Never knew horses or cattle or anything else, and he decided he wanted to be in the bush. He went to Rosewood Station first, and he was the bookkeeper there. I'm not sure who that might have been, for Besties. And then he went over to Elsie in the Weird and Never Never days. And there's bits and pieces in the middle too, but then sort of from Elsie he went to Monogeny, and he ended up in partnerships there with a fellow, the Crowson family. And then that dissolved or whatever happened in that, and then he ended up with Killarney. Mid-55 or something like that, he ended up with Killarney. And it was an outstation of the big VRD in them days. You know, when Delamere was part of thing, VRD, Killarney, I think it went in, you know, Campfield, Monogeny, they were all part of VRD. Anyway, he ended up with Killarney off the ballot and got it out of there. So it was a bare bit of dirt, even though it was the outstation of VRD, it was probably small amount of fencing on it, hardly any bores or water, so it was bare property. And our old fellow developed it up, you know, over all them years, and he got it up to a world-class cattle station in the mid-70s, you know, really high-grade fencing, the infrastructure, the houses, you know, sort of one of the first properties that had the air conditioning and had steel cattle yards, and we built our own horse sale complex, and yeah, it was unique. And then while we were there, as I said, there was 10 of us. Some of us are going off to boarding school. But at the same time, there was a large Aboriginal mob used to live with us, about 5 or 6 different families. And they stayed with us pretty well, you know, for 10, 15 years. They lived there, and they all each had 3 or 4 of their own kids. And we had this one school. The old fellow built a school, and Mum built a school on the property. And we all just had one teacher, and there was like from grade 1 to grade 6 in the one classroom. So at best maybe 17, 18, 20, you know, 20 would be the most we had in the classroom. Just all half Aboriginal and half us kids. Some other white kids every now and then. The Harts were one part of that family at one stage, Jody and Stephen and late Andrea. Their father was the sort of stud manager, so they all went to school with us there. Yeah, so we all sort of grew up there in that environment, and then back right in our earlier days, like the early 70s to mid-70s, sort of going to the late 70s, it was still all stock camp was all done by horseback mustering, you know. And in them days, it was the big stock camp plant, 60, 70 horses and 10 or a dozen blackfellas, Aboriginal stockmen, and ourselves. And you'd go out with the old style with your swag on a donkey or mule or whatever else, you know, and you'd probably 5 or 6 weeks you'd be out there mustering, come home, and like with them, we had vehicles. There was vehicles then. It wasn't that ancient, but they weren't used like today, where they go out in the stock camp. They were just based at the station for this boar runner and a few other things, you know. So in other words, when stock camps used to go, some of us kids or brothers, me or William or Joe, you'd just piss off with that stock camp. And no one would come and look for you or anything. So you'd be away for 5 or 6 weeks before you come home, and they're probably angry, your parents or the school, when you left, but when you come back, no one really cared. They're just all happy the stock camp come home, you know. So, yeah, and that was life, just growing up. And as I said, you know, in them days too, like the Aboriginals, and there was nothing between us, like though we referred to them as blackfellas, they called us whitefellas. There was nothing about any racial or anything about it. It was just how life was, you know. And in our sort of off season, when some of the Aboriginal families had stayed there with us over the wet, and it was just nothing to go sort of walk about with them. Not for weeks, but you'd probably go 2 or 3 days and do the old traditional blackfella stuff, cutting sugar bag from the tree, making boomerangs and bloody all out that traditional, just killing goannas, like eating goannas, and just lived that sort of life. And it was not anything like a touristy, it was just part of how we grew up.